kindness as an expression or as a courageous expression. To be kind in a world that is rocked with greed, hatred, and delusion takes courage. And that's part of what our practice is about, is to be able to do that. And included in kindness, or a near cousin of kindness, is compassion. And especially self-compassion, and not as a sentimental or as something that's like a moral demand or something that's an obligation. It's more an expression of wisdom. It's how wisdom expresses itself. It's how wisdom relates in the space that we're in. And so, yeah, I just want to emphasize that talking about kindness isn't hallmark spirituality. It isn't being nice. It's deeply connected to the Buddha's original motivation, which is to end suffering, to bring an end to suffering. The Buddha didn't go off on his spiritual search. That was the Buddha to be, because he wanted to discover bliss. It wasn't about escaping. He did to end suffering. That was the primary focus. That was the only focus, really, was to end suffering. So that was a result of his turning towards sickness, aging, death. I mean, turning towards those universal human experiences that are difficult to bear. And compassion was the motivation that the Buddha experienced right from the beginning. It was the beginning of the path. And it's woven into every aspect of it. You could say compassion and its expression as kindness is what happens when we directly understand dukkha and the cause of dukkha, and the path that leads to the end of dukkha, because that's compassion. Compassion is that expression. And wisdom is the method. Wisdom is how we can act compassionately in the world in a way that's really, truly skillful. So in this brief talk this morning, there's four things that I'd like to touch on. First is that suffering is universal, that it isn't a personal failure, that it's part of the human experience. The second is self-compassion is the foundation for compassion. It's the foundation for compassion for others. And there really aren't any others when we understand with wisdom. The third thing is compassion and kindness take courage, because it asks us to stay open, even when things are painful, even when things are difficult. And the fourth thing, which I've already touched on briefly, is that compassion naturally arises with wisdom, that the two are interlinked. So it comes from seeing clearly. Perhaps one of the most important things that I've discovered in my practice is that dukkha, suffering, that which is difficult to bear, isn't personal. And it includes everything from mild irritation to heartbreak, to the sense of dissatisfaction, to existential anxiety, and of course, sickness, aging, death. And Ruth Denison used to talk about an aspect of dukkha, the unsatisfactory aspect of it, as there's always a leak in the canoe. You're with your favorite person, it's a beautiful sunny day. You've got your bread and your cheese and your wine, and you're out on a beautiful lake. And everything seems just about perfect, but there's a leak in the canoe. And when we are dependent on or looking for satisfaction and pleasure and things of the senses, worldly things, there's always a leak. There's always something that could be better. So that's dukkha too. And that doesn't mean that we're doing anything wrong. We can't prevent leaks in the canoe. There's always something. What happens though is we don't just feel dissatisfaction. We don't just feel pain or angst or anxiety. We add to that, something is wrong with me. It's not just this is difficult, life is difficult. It's I'm defective, or it shouldn't be like this, or I shouldn't be like this. And that kind of thinking becomes kind of the background hum in our kind of thinking process. And that subtle shift changes everything. There's a sense of angst. Because now these basic conditions of a human birth become a self, an identity, something that we get caught up in. So sadness becomes weakness. Anxiety becomes proof that there's something wrong with me. And this can show up as manifest as perfectionism, as overwork, as getting caught up in comparing and competing, spiritual striving, and or being a jerk to oneself. Which brings me to something personal. So back at the beginning of my kind of spiritual journey, I was a jerk to myself. I was pretty awful, a world-class jerk, you could say. Didn't matter what I accomplished. It wasn't ever enough. There was a couple of graduate degrees, striving in the work world, and I had unreachable standards. Not to say that having aspirations is a problem. It could be a good thing, but I used aspirations as a stick to beat myself up with, and live with lots of anxiety and depression. And meditation didn't immediately make that go away. In fact, I think my meditation practice kind of shined a light of awareness on those mental qualities, that delusion. And I'd sit down to meditate and think, wow, look at all this judgment. I must be the most judgmental meditator on the planet. It's all over the place. And that's where Ruth Denison came in with an intervention. Thank you, Ruth. I was on a retreat with Ruth up at Brighton Bush Hot Springs. I think it was one of my maybe second or third retreats. And I was out just minding my own business, doing walking meditation, thinking that I was doing really, decent practice, but kind of tense. And she walked up to me and she said, you need to love yourself more. Just out of the blue. And at first I was a little defensive. It's like, what does that mean? I need to love myself more. It wasn't a discourse on emptiness. It wasn't on, something from the Abhidhamma. It was, you need to love yourself more. And I remember almost feeling offended, like I was doing something wrong, which was part of the problem, actually. So, then it started to actually work its way into my heart. It's like, actually, there isn't anything you need to do to deserve love in this moment. That everything is okay. And so there was something that was touched here that let me know that she was right. That's true. And there was a softening and a kind of relaxation. And tears came. I'm starting to feel myself tear up a little bit now as I'm talking about it. So it was about understanding kindness on a deep level. And I'm sure she could read my body language and, she was picking up on something. But yeah, powerful intervention. So here's an invitation for us as a group to do a little inquiry, just a reflection. So when you're struggling, what's your relationship to your own experience of struggle? Do you become your own ally or your own prosecutor? So just noticing what comes up. And this inquiry isn't about self-judgment, and it certainly isn't about judging the judging. So just noticing. That relationship matters more than we think. So there's that invitation. What I discovered is a distinction in practice that's possible. And it's the difference between feelings and mental emotional states, or even physical states, and the stories we tell ourselves about those states. So just a kind of basic human feeling might be, I feel sad, or I feel scared, or I feel alone. But the secondary story is, I'm sad, therefore I'm weak. Or I'm scared, I'm never going to get it together. What's wrong with me? Or I'm alone. That means nobody is ever going to want to be with me. And the story that the mind adds to the primary emotional experience starts to turn it into a self, turns it into an identity. And this is the place where insight practice or meditation practice becomes radical. We begin to see that what we call self is actually a flow of conditioned processes. It isn't a thing. So if we turn towards it and actually see what that is, we see that it's thinking, it's sensations, it's emotions, it's body sensations. There isn't any fixed identity at the center. So that brings us to the second thing, which is self-compassion and wisdom. Self-compassion and wisdom, or not self. Self-compassion isn't self-improvement. That would be delusion, because there isn't really a solid self. It's the willingness to stop being at war with the illusion of a separate self. And that's where this practice deepens the conversation. In this tradition, we speak of three characteristics, which are universal: impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and unself. And of those three, the thing that's the most difficult, the aspect of experience that's the most difficult for most of us to get, is the non-self or anatta aspect of things. And a lot of times people take that to mean I don't exist, which is a misunderstanding. It simply means that there isn't any fixed, solid, independent entity that we are or can defend or perfect. Back a few weeks ago, Vic was here talking about anatta. And so this kind of dovetails with your talk, Vic. There is an experience that's happening. There are sensations, there are thoughts, there's all of those things. But here's the radical proposal that this practice offers us. The most compassionate thing that we can do is realize impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and non-self. That's the most compassionate thing we can do. That's what compassion looks like. Because when we don't see impermanence, we cling to things that can't be clung to. Because when we don't see unsatisfactoriness, we blame a illusory self and others for things that there isn't anybody there to blame for. And when we don't see non-self, we take everything personally. And that causes lots of suffering. And instead, what we start to see is, oh, this is a conditioned mental or emotional state. The mind tends to say, this is me, but there isn't any me there. There's just this stream of consciousness that's changing. So this practice begins to soften that tendency towards creating that identity. So just an invitation for a little brief inquiry. Just right now, can you sense your experience as just something that's happening rather than happening to someone? For just a moment, just notice right here in this room or on Zoom, is there a solid, separate self inside you controlling this experience? Or is there breathing, hearing, thinking, feeling, those things happening? Is there just life happening in this moment? And notice what that feels like, what that experience is. When we begin to sense experience as a process or processes rather than possessions, something tends to soften, something relaxes inside. And with that softening and that relaxation, we can feel a tenderness. The heart tends to open. So that's the invitation. So the third aspect that I wanted to touch on is that this takes courage. Even when we understand intellectually non-self and impermanence and unsatisfactoriness, compassion still means not abandoning what hurts, what's painful. And that isn't easy. That's why it takes practice and patience and good spiritual friends to support us.
College room doing an online Zoom thing.
Yeah,
You okay?
it's good. Yeah, appreciate that. So Pema Chodron, who's a Vajrayana Buddhist teacher, said this practice that I'm talking about that we're doing is daring because it involves learning to relax and allow ourselves to move gently towards what scares us. When our sense of being a self, identified with the self, starts to soften, there's that tenderness that happens. And if I criticize myself first, maybe I won't feel so vulnerable. That's the rationale, the part that does that. But the self-criticism closes the heart, and so there's kind of a daring, there's a willingness to be vulnerable. It takes courage to stay open and practice. And that courage to be kind and compassionate often looks really ordinary. It's the willingness to choose empathy and generosity and understanding, even when it's uncomfortable, or risky, or inconvenient. And it asks us to break through indifference, to offer help when it would be easier to decline or just move on, to face differences rather than withdraw from them, and to nurture our sense of recognizing the shared human experience that we all are a part of. So kindness and compassion aren't passive. They're active parts of that's spring from insight, from our direct understanding of how to be with this mind and this body. And our practice really invites us to look at the roots of suffering, not just the symptoms, and both internal and external. So I've focused so far mostly this morning on the internal ones, the stories that we tell ourselves that create suffering. But there's also external conditions. And we're certainly experiencing those. They're always here. injustice, aggression, exclusion, violence. And this practice helps us to wisely and compassionately respond rather than react. And so instead of acting out of anger or fear, we can move towards, what makes the difference, what actually does lead to peace, rather than perpetuating suffering. And it isn't because we're good people, but because wisdom sees interdependence. It's selfless. There isn't anybody doing anything. It's just compassion. It's compassion acting in the world. That's the practice. And it takes courage, especially in a culture that rewards harshness, productivity, competition, comparison. So what we're invited to do is turn towards our own wounds rather than abandoning them, shutting down, disconnecting. And when we soften towards our own suffering, we're less likely to harden towards suffering of others. There's a parallel process there. It isn't separate. It's the same thing, really. There aren't any others. So, and just in case this sounds a little like, it still sounds like this is sort of the soft kind of hallmark version of Buddhism. I'm not sure I could construe that, but that could be there. I'd like to share with you a poem. This is from James Cruz, and it's called Compassion. My friend and I snickered the first time we heard the meditation teacher, a grown man, call himself honey, with a hand placed over his heart to illustrate how we too might become more gentle with ourselves and our runaway minds. It's been years since we sat with legs twisted on a cushion, holding back our laughter. But today, I found myself crouched on the floor again, not meditating exactly, just agreeing to be still, saying honey to myself each time. I thought about my husband splayed on the couch with aching joints and fever from a tick bite. What if he never gets better? Or consider the threat of more wildfires, or the possible collapse of the Gulf Stream. Then remember that in a few more minutes, I'd have to climb down to the cellar and empty the bucket I placed beneath the leaky pipe that can't be fixed until next week. How long do any of us really have before the body begins to break down and empty its mysteries into the air? Oh, honey, I said, for once, without a trace of irony or a blush of shame. The touch of my own hand on my chest, like that of a stranger, oddly comforting in spite of the facts. That's James Cruz. Yeah. So there's one more piece I want to share, and then I think there'll be time for group sharing questions. So the fourth is compassion as the expression of wisdom. My understanding of the Dharma, the Buddhist path, is it isn't about becoming special. It isn't about becoming anything, really. It's about ending suffering. And what the Buddha discovered wasn't a belief system. It was clear seeing. It was seeing things exactly as they are. And he discovered that suffering ends not by perfecting the self, but by seeing clearly. When impermanence is seen, clinging softens. When non-self is seen, defensiveness softens. When defensiveness softens, compassion naturally arises. There's a meta phrase that I love to reflect on. It's may I know the complete safety of an undefended heart. May I know the complete safety of an undefended heart. Kind of goes against the grain of our conditioning, because the sort of standard view is, an undefended heart is vulnerable and it's going to be painful, better defend. But this practice actually leads us in the direction of an undefended heart that can really connect. Wisdom sees interdependence. It sees how we're all connected. And the only safety for us is to operate out of that understanding, really. Compassion responds based on that wisdom and understanding. So I'm going to pause there and just maybe invite us to just reflect here what's most alive for us this morning. What's alive in your heart? And is there anything that, particularly about the practice of courageous kindness? What does that mean? What does that look like or feel like? Notice what comes up. And if there's a few voices, either from the room or on Zoom, being open to hearing. Yeah.